Hi, I'm Nancy Ralsima with On Point TV and Quilting with Nancy. We have been working on our Sunset Over Dublin quilt, and in the last session, I talked to you about putting the sashings and cornerstones in your quilt, and now we are ready for our setting triangles and corner triangles. Now, keep in mind, the setting solution that I've chosen for my quilt and in the book is on point, which means the blocks are actually tipped on point. That is my favorite setting solution. Doesn't always work for every quilt, but I do love an on-point setting solution, which is why we called the show On Point. But with an on point, there's a couple of other tricky things that you need to know. So here is the book, and I want you to know that the instructions that I'm going to tell you about are right here in the back, telling you what size to cut your setting triangles and your corner triangles and how they all go together, right? So for the quilt, I have half of it. This is the smaller quilt. I have some of the setting triangles and corners done, and I want you to see that this is the fabric. Now, I'm going to use a different fabric to actually show you the technique, mainly because, well, two reasons. I already have them cut, and I don't want to waste any more of this fabric because it's so gorgeous. Now, this fabric does have a directional print. You can see, like, the flowers are all going up in it. I don't know, it's a great print. It's from In the Beginning by Jason Yunter. I love this print, and it's probably from 2020. So if you're looking for it, you might be able to find it. You never know. This fabric has a directional print, and I love using a directional print on the setting triangles and corner triangles. It does make it a smidge bit more difficult, so I'm going to take you through those steps. And I'm not going to cut on this fabric for two reasons. One, I don't want to cut it, and I want to save as much as I can. And two, to make it a little bit more obvious. It's not so obvious to see on this fabric. So let me move these out of the way. And these are the ones that I've got pre-cut for this. But let me show you the technique using a stripe or more of a plaid. So this is the stripe or plaid that I'm going to use. And for the setting triangles, we need to have a 13-inch square. And depending on how big your quilt is, you'll need anywhere from, I think, 3 to 6 if you're making the king size. So I'm going to cut this 13 inches, but my ruler is only 12.5. So I'm going to use an extra ruler to add that 1/2 inch. So if I add a 1/2 inch from my smaller ruler, now I've got 13, lining it up on the horizontal line because I already did square this off. This fabric, it is best if you pre-size it. So I'll spray size it, and I've already done it with this, just to make it a little bit stiffer because you are going to be cutting triangles, and that's going to make a lot of bias edges. All right. So for this, I'm only going to do 1 square. So I've got my 1 square strip cut. Now, if I fold that in half, I can even cut this on my, oops, I'm going to have to square that up. One moment, please. There we go. Folding it in half so that I can use my smaller mat. First thing I need to do is square off the edge, lining up on the horizontal line of the ruler. There. Now I have a squared off edge, and I can flip it around. So now we need a 13-inch square. So I'm going to do the same thing using the 2 rulers. Now, if I was in my own studio, I'd grab my 15-inch ruler, but I'm not in my own studio, so I'm making do with what I have. There. Now I have 1 large 13-inch square. All right. And we need to cut this on the diagonal twice because this is our setting triangles. So we're going to be a little bit tricky here. We're going to turn the ruler this way. I'm sorry, the fabric that way, and I'm going to use one of my longer rulers so that I can go from end to end. And we are going to cut this on the diagonal twice. So here's 1 cut. Being careful you keep that straight. Now I'm going to have to turn it. Normally I don't turn it, I just turn my mat, but I only brought a small mat. So line up the design. Ooh, that looks pretty cool. And cutting the other direction. This is going to make the setting triangles. So for every quilt you make on point, the setting triangles are the ones that go on the top, the sides, and the bottom. And this is what makes this technique so cool. Using a directional fabric. It makes the quilt finish so interesting because you can see the directions. But when you would maybe worry that maybe sometimes the stripes would go in the opposite directions. But with this, all you do is the one that you've cut from the top, that is always going to go in the very top of the quilt. Then the two on the sides, this one will go to the left of the quilt, the right of the quilt, and this one will go in the bottom, so that your stripes will always be going in the same direction. Now with this plaid, I don't know that it would have been a huge difference if these had gotten mixed up, but you can imagine if you just had a plain stripe, what a difference that would make. So cutting the setting triangles on the diagonal twice, just take this stack to the right, to the left, to the top, and the bottom. Maybe put a little post-it note on there so that you won't get confused. And then there's another trick when doing stripes or directional prints for the corner triangles. So for every quilt that is set on point, you need 4 corner triangles. Makes sense, right? There's only ever going to be 4 corners. So for this quilt, you are going to cut 2 squares that are 6 inches. There's one part. Oops, I'll make sure it stays lined up. So now I have 2 squares. Lay those 2 squares, open them up. You're not going to cut them at the same time. You're going to cut them individually. So the one square you will cut from the top left to the bottom right. The other square you will go in the other direction, the bottom left to the top right. All right, so they're cut in opposite directions. This goes to the top right of the quilt. This goes to the bottom left. This goes to the bottom right, and this goes to the top left. So now you're still able to keep everything in the direction just like you want it. And it's really cool if you pick a fabric that is very, very obvious as to how that all fits in. So if you've not tried that before on a non-point quilt, don't be afraid. Give it a try. Your quilt with the directional prints and the setting triangles and corner triangles will make all of your friends envious, and they'll think that you had fussy cut them all. Go ahead, tell them you did. They'll be shocked. When I come back, I'm going to show you how we piece these into the quilt. So when you're working on a quilt that is on point, typically you work with it in 2 halves, just like as if you were doing a quilt with rows. If you got 8 rows, you do 4 rows and 4 rows, so you have 1 center seam. Same thing with the quilt that's on point, although the corner triangles and setting triangles can confuse it a little bit, so just pay close attention to the setting solution in the book. So I've already got 1 half done. So this is the top. No, this is the top. Here it is. This will be the top in the smaller quilt, and I've got corner triangles on 2 sides with the setting triangles in the middle. And I want you to notice the cornerstones. So these little guys, these are actually going to stick out when you're in the process of making the quilt. What we'll do when we're putting the borders on it is we will do some stay stitching on there, because that will be a bias hedge, but that will not be a problem when we get the quilt going. So just keep that in mind, that yes, that will be kind of sticking out, which is kind of odd, I understand. So let's put this one on, and I'm going to work on the other half of the quilt. So here I've got it set up in rows. So I've got my first row will be down here. I've got my corner triangle and the sashing and cornerstone. This will be my next row, my square with 2 sashings and 2 setting triangles. Then this row will be completely done. He's finished. But then this will have a setting triangle on the 2 ends. So let's piece these. And I want to caution you, especially on a row like this, that has the setting triangles on the 2 ends, to pay, again, very close attention to the setting solutions. Because oftentimes it'll happen where you'll maybe end up with this guy go in here and you've got them you know, kind of not right, all right? So keep it in mind. Look at the directions of your print if you're using a directional, and that should help keep this straight. So when I'm doing these, I usually am going to chain piece a little bit. So I'm going to pre-do my pins here. And I'm going to pin this side, and I'm going to pin to the other side. So I've got them both ready when I'm going to my machine. And then the corner triangle that goes on the sashing row, I'm going to pre-pin that. And so for this one, here's a tip to find the center. I'll fold that sashing in half and just do a little crease there. And then do the same thing with the triangle. Fold it in half, make a little crease. Then I know where my centers are. Just find that a lot easier than measuring, I guess. And I'm going to pin that right in the middle. So let's go to our sewing machine. Now at the sewing machine, I'm going to start with the row that has 2 setting triangles on it. I'm going to sew 1 setting triangle on. If you didn't watch the previous episode, I've got here some seam tape that shows the center and then 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just running my fabric along that 1/4 inch mark for my 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm going to grab my row that has the cornerstone and the sashing with 2 cornerstones and the corner triangle. Oh, so confusing. Then I can snip off the back and sew the other triangle onto this row. Now, when I'm working on a whole quilt, I don't do that very often. I will usually work maybe 2 rows at a time, but it can get confusing. So don't be ashamed to just work 1 row at a time. Keep all your triangles in the right direction. All right. Snip this apart. Just like when we were putting the sashings together, you're always going to press to the sashing. So set your seam first. So even with the triangles, press to the sashing. And then on these, press to the sashing. So start with the sashing on top, which is going to seem odd. Then flip it up, so you're pressing to the sashing. If you don't do that, you'll just end up having to flip seams as you go. And if you do it ahead of time, it just makes everything go together more smoothly. So now I've got my first 2 rows done. I've got my row of the corner triangle, sashings, and then the row with the 2 setting triangles. Now these will go together, matching up the cornerstones, and the seam there, and the seam there, pinning those for sure. And then I'm going to see how much. No, I don't think I need to pin that extra there. It doesn't look like I have any anything to ease. So let's go to the machine. And my scissors, there they are. And press toward the row that has the sashings and cornerstone. There you you go. So that's the idea. And again, I mentioned that these are sticking out. They're supposed to be sticking out. That's okay. I'll show you how to deal with those when we're putting the border on. So give me just a minute and let me get all of this put together, and I'll maybe put the center seam together on camera. So I have the entire quilt done. So this is the small one, so you can see a picture of it here on the screen. This is the small one. Keep in mind there are 2 more sizes, so if you want to make a lot more blocks, shouldn't take you that long. You know all the techniques on how to do it and put the sashings on. When we get back together next time, we'll be talking about the borders, and specifically, I'm going to teach you how to do a chevron border and some tricky little mitered corners with that chevron border. I think you'll really like this idea. So I hope to see you next time. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can always email me at quiltingwithnancy@gmail.com. Head to the website onpoint-tv to pick up the book so that you'll be ready to start working on your quilt when we're getting it done. Have a great day.